Welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast. Becoming the dad God has called you to be takes a deeper dive. Dads too often stay at surface level. So let's dive deep into today's podcast.
Welcome back to the Dad Deep Dive Podcast. I'm Seth. I'm your host. And today we have an incredible episode with Darin Reeser. Jeff sits down with Darin and they talk about a simple question of what is a dad? Now, it sounds simple, but the reality is to be a daily, active, devoted dad, that takes work, it takes intentionality, and as you'll see on this episode, it takes a heart that loves the family the way that God intended.
Well, Darin Reeser, man, it's so good to have you sitting across the table. It's been too long since we haven't even really had much of a conversation in the last couple of months. So how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Jeff. I'm traveling out for work again, back out seeing people. So things are starting to ease up a little bit, COVID restrictions, et cetera. So been busy again, but it's good.
Well, I want to tell you, I love seeing your pictures on Facebook of your granddaughter. Man. And, as you know, we have that in common. And it just warms my heart. And I know that every time you have an opportunity to be with her, have her at the house, I know that's really important to you. So today's topic, I'm excited about today's topic. What is a dad? And we're going to get to that. What is a dad? And I know what excites me always when we do a podcast like this is thinking about our audience, the future audience that may be sitting here listening to us in the coming weeks, maybe gleaning, maybe we say one thing that resonates with them. Yeah. That makes a difference in their lives. And that's what we hope our listeners, as they tune into this Dad Deep Dive, are, the various topics that we cover are all related to being the dad, different aspects, because it's, there's not just one lane. Right. And because I know you and I know your story, it's hard for me to ask some of these questions. But for our listeners, let's start off. Would you just tell me and our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm an insurance professional. I've been in the insurance business for nearly 25 years, but I specialize in group insurance. So I travel a lot, working with large companies and solving their employer benefit needs. It's been really rewarding. I really enjoy it because I can appreciate the value of benefits and when a family needs those, whether it's life insurance or health-related benefits. And so solving those challenges with our customers and providing that financial protection for them at the time where they most need it is rewarding, and there's always something new. So I really enjoy doing that, but it requires a lot of travel too. So that's a pull on our family sometimes and has been over time. Managing that's something I've learned how to balance a little better. But it's really fun business to be in.
It's kind of that again. That kind of plays into your role, right? As the dad, that we can talk about that balance, that work and play, and family and all those kind of things. So what about speaking of your family, talk about your family.
Well, we've got, as you mentioned, an ever-growing family. We're blessed with that. We've got, Mary Jo and I have been married since 2010. We've been together since 2008, and we're raising a blended family. We've got 5 kids between us, and we've got a pseudo-adopted child, adult child too. I'll mention him in a minute, but my kids bookend our family. So my oldest son is Dylan, and then she has her daughter Haley, sons Colin and Dylan, and then the youngest is my daughter Becca. And then I mentioned Benji is we consider him a part of our family. He's a 24-year-old that's not really officially adopted, but he's been adopted into our family. And then we got 3 grandkids, or 3 granddaughters, as you mentioned. So Zoe May is 4. Lily Grace is 2 months now, Zoe's sister, and my son had his first daughter, Dylan Rain. So if we didn't have enough Dylans in the family, now we've got 2 boy Dylans and we've got a girl Dylan, but she's 6 weeks old. So we've got an ever-growing family, but blessed with that.
That's great. So having your wife's kids, and what were their ages when you started dating and got married?
Yeah, Dylan was 8, I believe. Colin was 10. Haley was 11 or 12, right? I mean, they were elementary school, middle school at the time. So, rough age. Becca was 8. She was our 2 youngest were in the same grade. So Dylan and Becca were in the same grade. it was a challenging time for them because it was formative years, and they were just starting to get into their middle school years. And so divorce is never easy to begin with, but the transition from that, moving to new schools, both for our kids, when we divorced, we relocated to different schools, and Mary Jo's family, their kids were going to the Woodland School District, so they didn't move too far. They moved here to Magnolia. Becca moved from Katy out here to Magnolia, and so that's strangely enough how Mary Jo and I met, right? She moved here to Magnolia after she'd been divorced. I moved out here to Magnolia because that's where my daughter was moved with her mom, and so that's kind of how we came together.
So I've been blessed to be the beneficiary of you all moving to the Magnolia area because of your 5 adult kids. I had 4 of them, and as their high school principal for our listeners, and so so I've known you and Mary Jo, your wife, in different capacities, and as parents. As former parents, I always have to clarify that when I'm talking to people. I'll say, well, he was a former parent of mine. Right. In other words, I was the principal where their kids went to school. I have to clarify that. So that span of, I guess, Becca was and Dylan were the youngest of those 4. And then Haley being the oldest, right? Yes. Right. So she was first to graduate. And Colin was right. Was he right behind her? Okay,
yes.
Yeah. So now, seeing them move to their next stages wherever they are, and in their professional and their own parenting. Blessing you with some of them with grandchildren, and then of course Benji was one of my former students too, and I was a part of that beginning. I saw the origin of when you took Benji under your wing and literally ran with it, and that story, we could do a podcast just on that story. So really, technically, I was thinking about this. You have yours and hers, and Benji's is kind of ours.
Kind of an ours.
Even though you are the adoptive parents, you adopted together.
Right.
Together. So, what a great story. So. Talk about, we're in this, I always like to know the dad story. What's your dad story? And so you mentioned that you've had some examples. You had dads and grandparents that shaped your views, about being a dad. As we tackle this title or this topic of what is a dad, Darin Reeser.
Right.
So talk to me about your examples.
Well, it came from a background where there was no divorce in our family, right? So there was a lot of stability, and there was structure in our family and our household, and there were great examples, although unique examples. So my dad, he didn't come from a family where they were I love you and hug you and kiss you and a lot of emotion that way, or outward emotion, but I always knew he was there. He was at all my games, he was at all my events, and he was extremely proud and supportive of us. His dad, my grandpa Reeser, he was quiet, hardworking, blue collar, but he was always there too. And he was just, they came from a different generation. He was in World War II, and I think that shaped as he came home from that. And one of the responsibilities he had when he got out of the military was they sweep through the Nazi camps. And so he saw some things and was a part of some things that changed him in ways that many from that generation were changed. So they were a little more quiet, a little more reserved, but we always felt love from him and support, and he was always there for his family. He was very strong about that and keeping us together and being loyal to our family, and I appreciate that. And my Grampy Garber is still alive. He's 97.
Wow.
So he's the oldest grandparent I have is still alive, and he had a different way of doing things, but he had a real quiet strength. He was a very faithful man. He was a deacon in the Mennonite church, and he loved his family as well, and he was just one that never said much about that, but you saw the way he carried himself, and again, that quiet strength. And so I had a lot of very solid, sound role models in my life, although each one of them was very unique, which kind of helped shape the way I think about parenting, or the way I tried to go about it and still try to go about it today.
Isn't it interesting that sometimes when we're in the midst of that, mentoring. We don't really know we're being mentored until we look back and reflect upon the gifts and the traits that they instilled in us.
Right.
When we catch ourselves maybe doing the same thing, or we have similar mannerisms, or we think similarly, and then as we get older, we're able to give credit, and unfortunately beyond, after they're gone, maybe, So you lost your dad early.
Yeah, and I think that was a real challenging time in my life, and it affected me for a long time, still does today. I think I heard this recently, a couple different quotes about this, and one of them was, someone else had said this, and I can't recall who, but said that it was really hard for them because they felt like losing their father at a young age. I was 25. That they felt like they lost the example of the person who they were supposed to be. So it really impacted that person's identity, and I related to that. It really changed my identity too. I felt like I was just getting to know him as an adult and a person, and all those things that you look for, that you need. Yeah. I didn't know where to go. Yeah. I didn't know where to find those things, and it really caused a lot of difficulty for me for years to come. So that really challenged me. The great outcome of that, though, by the same token, it was an epiphany years later, not too many years ago, but it became obvious that all these years I was searching for other things, and the reality is I had a Father in heaven that was there for me at all times.
Yeah, and I remember, Darin, that message that you shared. For our listeners, for 15 years we had an annual camp or a men's retreat. We don't like to use that word retreat, but because men do that a lot. But we went to camp, and you were one of our chapel speakers, and I distinctly remember that message. And so that a lot of us are blessed to have an earthly father and have our earthly father for many years, but all of us have a heavenly father.
Of course.
And so I love that acknowledgement. And sometimes we have to lose something to gain something. And I hear what you say. At 25, you're still looking at being mirrored, because you're up to that. You've seen what you're supposed to be up to that point, but what am I supposed to be the next 25 years? And I remember my dad had a bout with cancer when I was I must have been in my mid 40s or early 40s, and he survived it. But I remember there was kind of touch and go there for a while, and I remember having a conversation with him, and I said, Dad, I need you. I need you to get through this because your family needs you. I need you. And I was fortunate to have my dad until he was, 82 years old. So, but it's never long enough,
Sure. But I think a good thing I learned from that too, and process more and more as years go by, is that others that are in that situation, there's others that had physical fathers, there's others that didn't have a dad, there's others that had examples, but maybe it wasn't their biological father, but they had a dad in their life. So all the different scenarios that people deal with, I think a message that was really important to me that I could share with others too is that no matter what your circumstance is, and certainly as a believer, that you have a Father in heaven and you always have someone there for you. But one of the things we talk about too is having others and being in relationship with others that have gone through those things with you, before you, and trying to share that and understanding what are the things that they learned that maybe mistakes they made that they share with you, or things that they learned that worked really well, so you can try to continue to pattern that success. But being in relationship with others and being faithful in that way too really makes a difference in being able to move forward, I think, past those things.
Yeah, I think what's hard for us as men, whether you're a dad or not, is that we think that we have to go this thing alone, if you're blessed like we have been to be a part of a larger body, whether it's a church or a men's group or some type of connection, a brotherhood, when we get past the water cooler conversations of how's the weather and and did you see the game last night, is what's deeper, and that we carry some of the same hurts and burdens. And I think as men, sometimes don't you think that we are the only ones going through what we're going through, and that no one else would understand, and definitely not another man.
And I think too we have that picket fence syndrome, where you look over at the neighbor's white picket fence and everything looks great on the outside, and you see them coming and going, and they hug and kiss every morning on the way out the door. But we all know that they struggle with things behind closed doors in their own personal lives and professional lives, and that's just natural. But I think it's often, you're right, that we believe that it's only us, and I think it's a challenge for some of us to raise our hand and say, I need some help, or I need some advice. And so especially if you've lost a mentor, a father figure, or your father earlier in life, being able to raise your hand and say, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
Really important.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to stress with people, whether it's a group of men or a group or women or a mixed group, is, I ask the question, who are your people? Who really are those people that care about your journey, care about you, and are your 3 a.m. friends, and really that you can have a lot of associates, and you can have a lot of, I don't know, in business you have customers and clients and so forth, and you have casual conversations and so forth, but who are really the ones that you can count on and trust, and if you have just a handful of those, I mean, you're really lucky. But if there's a listener out there that is not connected to a church or some type of men organization, I highly recommend, as the Bible says, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another, and so we cannot do this alone. So one of the questions that you shared with me that I'm just going to ask is, what lessons have you learned through this season of your life? You obviously you shared that, the acknowledgement of your Heavenly Father, but what else would you say about that time?
Well, I think the important thing for me that as you mentioned, things that I saw but didn't appreciate that I was learning, is that my dad was there. He was invested in me. It goes back to, we talk about all the time, what's a dad, and the difference between a dad's a noun, it's a name, it's one's father, right? It's biological, and it's just that. The difference between a dad is somebody really cares about you. They're invested in you. They support you. They love and encourage you. So intentionally be involved in my kid's life and making sure that and certainly I'm not the expert on this. I'm not the one that did this right every time. There's a lot of mistakes that I can say I made too, but all with good intentions of just trying to be present and intentionally involved in their lives. And that's the thing that I think I learned most, that now as I look back and my kids are adults, I think that they would say to you if you ask them, because I've heard them say it to me and say it to others, which I really appreciate and feel good about, is that my dad was always there for me. And so that's really, it sounds simple. And some of the most simple things, though, maybe are the easiest things that are right in front of our face sometimes, but often the most difficult to talk about, right? You just have to be intentionally involved in your kid's life, whatever that is, wherever they are, without strings or judgment. And that's really hard as a parent, because we don't want them to fall into some of the traps we did, but sometimes you need to allow that to happen.
Yeah. So I know there are listeners out there that would resonate with your scenario that we described of being divorced, both your spouse and yourself, the second marriage, bringing in each other's kids into this one family. So talking about how do you take yours and hers and make them ours. So how do you manage that?
I wish there was a great formula for that, because I would have paid a lot of money for that or whatever I had, 12 years ago. I think the difficult thing is having different experience and backgrounds and families of origin and expectations. So many things that are just hardwired into us. So Mary Jo had a family of origin that was much different than mine. Her image of her father, her relationship with her father was much different than mine. And so bringing those things together and then understanding that your kids, parents, so my stepchildren's dad is different and has different ways and beliefs, and likewise the other side. So, really trying to understand each other, where you come from, is really important first, and understanding what those expectations are. But then communicating about, okay, what's important to us as a family? And so really navigating that with your wife about how are we going to do these things? Because some of it's just, for example, holidays. Well, we always do this on Thanksgiving. Well, that may be something I never thought of, and I think that's a little, crazy. Who heard of that, right? Well, her family's Polish, so they do, certain foods on Thanksgiving that I would have never thought of, right, for example. So just communication, sum that one up. Really communication, and then really being intentional about what you want for your family. And then you have to just start going forward and making those mistakes. But the last thing I think is most important for a blended family, too, is that you will disagree. Mom and dad are going to disagree. But you need to be aligned and come to an understanding that the kids see that you're both on the same page, though, for the best intentions for them too, because I think that's a critical thing for success too. Is that even if you argue or debate things behind closed doors together, kids need to see you're on the same page, because we need to have some direction and consistency and structure, because they came from a broken situation, and we want to create stability for them. We don't want to create more strife.
To me, of course, I was never in that situation, but I would wonder what's the fine line where being the stepdad and the dad, the disciplinarian,
right.
where you've heard this statement, "You're not my dad,"
right?
You're not my dad,
right.
And have you heard that before? Maybe when they were younger, or maybe early on, maybe yeah. I don't know, but
they never said it to me that I recall. They might have said it a few times to Mary Jo, but I think I was always clear. Counselor that we went to, family counselor, and I would advocate for anybody that is in a blended family or divorced or just in general, but go to a counselor or a life coach and talk through some of these really important conversations. But Greg Ryan, counselor here, gave me a piece of advice, and he said, as a stepdad, you want to continue as like the favorite uncle. Think about yourself in that respect, right? So they love you, they look up to you, you're the fun guy, etc. But you're an adult too, and you're setting some boundaries and some structure and things like that, but you're not their dad per se. I can function as a dad in their life, and I was there for them, and I intentionally was there for them and wanted them to know that I love and supported my stepkids. But by the same token, I supported the relationship with their dad too. And other side of the equation. So whether you're a mom or a dad, making sure that you support that relationship with their parents on both sides, I think is really important. But just being there for them in the ways that they need me. And I think that was the thing that I really focused on and when there came issues for discipline, I always felt like they knew what my expectations were, because Mom and I had some conversations about, here's the way we think about rules and boundaries and things in our house. But I think for Mom and her kids, it was important that she was the one that executed some of that discipline or carried that out if it needed to be, and I was the one for my kids as well, because we didn't ever want that to feel like it was hard enough, right? Yeah, so I think that was that was one of the ways that we looked at that, and I don't know if that's certainly the only way, but it was a way that we were more successful.
Well, I think that's great, because as you build that relationship, you probably earn more and more opportunities to impart, your wisdom, and also you earn the right, because they see that you're there for all seasons and not just you're not just the guy that comes hard.
Absolutely.
but you're going to, if there's a house rule, it's not just your rule. It's,
Sure.
And the communication, I think the key, like you said, is you and Mary Jo were, on the same page, and then you work from there.
Right. And I think you're right. It's a privilege to be involved in their life at that level. Mm-hmm. But it's also important that they know that I'm going to call them out when they're not within boundaries, because that's my obligation, it's my responsibility, but it's my privilege to be a father figure in their life to help them in that respect. And that's what parents do. That's what we need. We need that accountability too. So when you step out of line, we're going to call that out, but it's because we love you and we care about you, and we're always here for you anyway, right? Everybody makes mistakes.
So how did you establish a relationship with all of those kids? I know because holistically it's one thing, but then they all have different personalities. They're all at different age groups. You went from having your 8-year-old daughter to now high school. Was Haley in high school?
Haley was junior high.
Junior high, but there was still an age. So now you got two girls on opposite end of the spectrum. So so your daddy's girl, and now you got another, and all those in between, the boys in between.
Yeah, I tried to just meet them where they were. So for me, my dad would be at all my events and things like that. So I was at all their events. 6 a.m. I drove Haley to cross country. I'd take her to school, I'd take her to coffee, I'd pick her up. I really just tried to set up things where we were intentionally meeting with each one of them or doing things with them. We just had an opportunity to hang out where they probably didn't see at the time that I was intentionally being alone with them or having time with them where we could just hang out and talk. But I tried to find time where I could meet them where they were and do things together. So like my daughter Becca, we had breakfast every Friday morning. We'd go to before, and I'd take her to school. So that was time. Or, once they start driving, it became more difficult because then their lives got even more complicated with extracurricular and school as well. So we had to set up time. But really, my thought was just trying to find ways to be with them. Colin's birthday, he liked sporting events. I'd taken him to Rockets games. I'd taken him to Steelers game when we were in Pittsburgh. Dylan liked to do things gaming-wise. We'd go look at computer stuff. I just tried to find things. My son liked to hunt. He likes to be outdoors. I always tried to find ways where I could be with him in that same respect. So, just finding ways to find where they are and support them and find a way in through those events or situations.
Yeah. Well, in Dad University, we talk about just the title Dad stands for daily act of devotion. Mm-hmm. You've listed 3 here, on how to make an impact. Mm-hmm. So, be willing, be intentional. You've said that several times.
Right.
And be present.
Right.
So, and you've alluded to how you've done those things, and I think the key is you having the desire to do those things, because I think there's a lot of men that would come into this relationship gaining 3 step children overnight and not really sure fully grasping the opportunity, so to speak.
Right. Well, it was challenging for me, and so ironically I had a stepdad at my mid-30s, early 30s. And that was difficult for me to call him stepdad. I'm kind of embarrassed to say that now, but it's because I felt so strongly about my relationship with my dad that here's this guy, and I'm an adult, right? Mm-hmm. So here I am thinking about this, and I love him and appreciate him for who he is and the relationship. And my mom and I are still together, or my mom and him are still together, of course. So I knew what that was like as an adult. I just always thought about, because I was so lucky to have a set of parents and that consistency in our family and all of our grandparents and my parents, that I looked at our situation, my kids and my stepkids, and thought how difficult this must be. And I always found myself putting myself in their shoes. Well, how must they feel about this guy, this stranger, right, that's here, like telling me what to do or asking me to take out the garbage or whatever, just all these things. How complicated and difficult that was. And so I really tried not to be heavy-handed in anything, where I just wanted to be more focused on building those relationships and making sure that they trusted me and respected me in those ways, and I provided the same for them, and I wanted to be there for them in the ways that they would slowly, and they each individually slowly opened up in different ways. But it was, it's been a real privilege.
So Darin, our final words to our audience. So our title again, what is a dad? Mm-hmm. So how would you summarize that? What is a dad?
Yeah, a dad has nothing to do with biology, right? A dad has everything to do with the features that we talked about. He's invested in his kids. He loves his kids. He respects his kids. He gives them all the things that he can within reason that he can, the tools and resources he can, and he does all that unconditionally. No strings attached. He's there for them to help guide them, and at the younger age, you have to be the dictator, and at about age 8 to 10, you become a coach. And as they grow, you become a different level of a coach, but you're there to hear them and support them, encourage them, and just help them understand what they want out of life, and you help them get that. And I mean, I think that's our job when they're in those years. It's just make sure you give them the structure so they understand the difference between right or wrong, and then you love them, support them, and encourage them, and let them go make their choices.
And it never ends.
It never ends.
Because once a dad, always a dad.
Right.
And
you mentioned it. Iron sharpens iron in that respect too. I mean, it really is. It's interesting looking at now my kids that have kids and having conversations with them in ways that I could have never dreamed of. It's it's just an amazing blessing to be able to see that and impart a different type of experience on them and see how they take that and how they put that to use. And it's been a pretty amazing journey.
And then, of course, Benji, that we talked about briefly, has been able to be, he's been able to be a witness and a receiver of some of that same love. So you have virtually mirrored, you and Mary Jo both mirrored him, so that hopefully that when he has his own family one day, he's going to have some of that foundation is going to be from the influence of you and Mary Jo. So like you said, it's not always about biology.
No, it really isn't. It's people, kids, young adults, middle age, you always need support, encouragement, wisdom from others that have been there before. And so wherever anybody that's listening today, if it's the one thing, like you mentioned when we started this, if there's one thing, it's the one thing I think that I'm most focused on, and you pointed this out, is just be intentional in looking for those opportunities, be open to finding opportunities to be a part of someone's life who needs that, or needs that word, or needs that hand on the shoulder. You just have to be aware, be open, and be looking for those opportunities where you can support and encourage somebody who needs you, even if it doesn't look like they do. Just be present for them.
I learned what I learned from you today. If I was someone that was going into a situation like yours, that was the fact what you said about meeting them where they are, not forcing yourself into the picture, appreciating the privilege of the opportunity to be their father figure in the house, however they see it, but but being willing and being present and all those things coming together. I think sometimes men want to just force himself in. They want to be, I know that when I became the principal at Magnolia High School, I wanted to be old, quick, but there's no replacement for time.
Right.
Sometimes we just have to put in the time. Yeah. And like you said, they have a funny way of showing their appreciation sometimes, but especially in those, junior high school years, perhaps, but they come back,
right?
And they return, and the fruits of your labor, because of your persistence and again, your willingness. So Darin, I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you. What a privilege it's been for me to see you and Mary Jo from really kind of from the sidelines and through all of your scenarios that you described. Hearing you talk about it though is another story. But I've seen, I've seen the results, and the results are great, and they're still in progress.
It's a work in progress.
We're always,
that's right.
Yes. And that's what I want our listeners to know. We're never done. Right. It's always a process. Right. No matter how old you are, as long as you have a dad alive, you're still going to call your dad. You're still the son. He's the dad. And once a dad, your kids are going to be calling you, and that you want them to.
Yes.
But the conversation changes.
Right. It does.
But there's still a conversation.
Right. So. Yeah, that's the important thing for me is that meet people where they are, and let them tell you what they need. But you have to be available. You have to be present. Yeah. And you were there for our kids too. So thank you, through those years in this ministry.
Yeah. Well, to God be the glory.
Amen.
Thank you, Darin, for being the dad and the husband and the brother that you are.
Thanks, Jeff.
I love you.
Love you too.